let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the award-winning podcast where we talk about gaining, fetishism, and everything plus size. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we are continuing our series of dinner table talks. We've got a few guests with us, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves one by one.
Hi everyone, my name is Cam. I go by biggerisbest, and I identify as an enabler.
Yes, I'm Cube. I also am known as Moshe. I identify as an enabler, and I have been involved on and off in the community since the early 1990s.
Hi, I'm Dom. I am a feeder and a gainer, but predominantly a feeder, and my online name would be coachgains.
Hello. I'm April. I also go by canadianfatsexual on multiple platforms. I guess I identify with admirer, encourager, and feeder most of all. Never really considered enabling as a term, but it completely makes sense. And that's me.
Fabulous. Listen, y'all, we have a gaggle of bitches here today to have a wonderful conversation, and as you can see from the title, not everyone's a gainer, you know, and I think this is really the premise, right? Yes, we love our big boys. Some of us are big boys, some of us are not. But today is an opportunity to give some love, some shine, an opportunity for community and discussion with the other side of that conversation. So listen, you'll have been sharing with us some of your labels and identities. I would be curious to put it to the group. When you consider, and we've kind of got like 4 labels at this stage, right? Encourager, admirer, feeder, enabler. For each of you, how would you maybe draw the lines between these different identities as far as you understand them?
Even though I'm a gainer in the sense that I want to be bigger and have a bigger belly, I think for me, the distinction is just the amount of joy I get out of facilitating that with guys and working with them and talking to them about what they want. And then obviously the experience of feeding them and, you know, the response that I get from people about how it makes them feel. So I think for me, it is that outwardness that I love to bring people in, make them feel good, make them enjoy what it is they're experiencing. And that is what turns me on the most, I would say.
I totally agree with that, Dom. There's nothing I love more than watching people enjoy a good meal, enjoying food. For that reason, I feel like I am an encourager and a feeder because I both like to feed people food, but I also like to just serve food and people eat it themselves. And that's super hot as well. I love enjoying a meal with someone. I think the thing that also makes me an admirer is that watching someone enjoy a good meal. I also just like big dudes, big women, big anyone. And I feel like that also fits in that admirer framework is I'm admiring your body for what it is. It's beautiful. So I think of that alongside the admirer title as well. It's funny, I never really considered myself an enabler. I guess I am because I'm like, hell yeah, go get that dessert. But it's so funny. I grew up with it having a negative connotation, that word, for some reason. But ultimately, if you have consent in the relationship to enable, then I think that could be really hot as well.
It's interesting. So, I mean, to the question about like drawing the line, I think that an admirer, to me, was always just like another way to say like a chubby chaser. And so it's sort of like, if you're in this community, I feel like at a baseline, you're probably an admirer. You probably appreciate that on some level. I think the distinction between like an encourager and an enabler, because they are like, I mean, like if you look it up on Google, like they are synonyms. There is like some crossover, but I think the distinction really comes down to like where the focus is. I think a lot of times for encouraging, it is a like we're trying to like make something happen, and then for an enabler, it's like, well, something is happening, and like I want to help you enable that. Like I want to like make that kind of go like further down where it's going. And so it's like it's a subtle, but I think an important distinction.
Well, when I started, there was gainers, feeders, and encouragers. And so I thought, oh, I must be an encourager. And the truth is, I more enjoyed watching people enjoying themselves rather than forcing them or pushing them into that direction. I wanted someone who could confirm that what I found was sexy was the same thing they found was sexy about themselves. And when I actually discovered Thicc Radio and heard the term enabler, I thought that actually in some ways seems a little more accurate, because I want someone who can pursue their own desires as well as fit in with mine, rather than me pushing someone who isn't quite interested in it.
Not to toot our own horns here, but I know that enabler might not have necessarily been a part of the zeitgeist until, like Moshe said, he heard it on the radio.
But actually, to that point, Cam, you were the first person that I heard talk about the idea of being an enabler. And I feel like you've said that maybe it didn't necessarily start with you, but you've certainly taken it with...
No. I cannot take credit for creating the term. I just saw someone on Grommr use it once, and I was just like, oh, wait a minute. And so I just started going from there. And so I've been on the podcast several times. And so I always use it here because I think it's important to get across. And I think what's funny about it is, even if people don't necessarily know what it means initially, we all know what it means to enable, but they're curious what it means in the community context. It gives the opportunity to explain yourself. And I think queer folks, we love labels. And I think some people kind of bristle at labels, but I think the most important thing about a label is that it makes communication easier, and you don't necessarily always have the opportunity to explain what you mean by that, because there's so much even within a label what it can mean. And so when I say oh, I'm an enabler, I'm oh, what is that? And it's excellent, now I get to tell you who I am and go from there.
I was going to say, even though you may not necessarily take credit for the term origin, I mean, you've been on the show, you use the term regularly, you have brought it into the zeitgeist. So don't downplay your own part in spreading the popularity of that term.
Thank you.
I think what this brings up for me is maybe what's going to be an undercurrent throughout this episode, right? Ultimately, what is the distinction between a lot of these terms and ideas? Maybe minute to some people, maybe it doesn't matter, but therein lies the point of, well, what does it mean to identify as a thing? How do we utilize that to have successful engagements within the community? How do we have conversations around consent and pleasure whilst also respecting boundaries and pushing? Because, of course, in order to grow, one must eat, and likely being in a smaller body, there must be some amount of pushing to eat a little bit more, to grow a little more, to kind of grease the wheels on the train type of thing, I suppose in my mind, it's a sort of proximity to action is almost the sliding scale of the identities. Admiring is almost the further out, right? You're looking from the outside in going, I like what's going on over there, I'm a watch, spectator in the stands type of thing, The whole encourager, enabler moment, obviously that's in closer proximity. That's people helping out on the team, maybe like the water boy, making sure all the big boys get their electrolytes when they come off the pitch at halftime type of thing. And then feeder is the person who's nah, this is going too slow. You gotta pour that shit down the throat. And at least that's how it makes sense in my brain. Maybe other people think differently. So listeners, if you see these identities as different things, if you have a different rubric and mindset, write into us at thiccradio@gmail.com. If you're listening to this on a platform like YouTube or Spotify where you can comment and let us know what you think about this conversation. But y'all, I think it's time we talk a little bit around about some of our experiences and how it connects with gaining and fetism. So maybe we use some of these different terms and we play around with them, but talk to us. What were those experiences like when you first kind of came to grips with oh, I could really see myself as this, or this really gives clarity and context to what I want to do in a dalliance? Tell us more about that.
I feel like I could say a lot here, so I'll try to not ramble for too long. I feel like I always considered myself bi or pansexual, but the more and more I embrace my sexuality, I realize I'm nearly exclusively attracted to larger folk, especially bellies, folks enjoying food, feeding others, serving others food. And I'm far more into bellies than I am into genitals. It's always been a part of me since a very young age. I think I was 6 years old when I first realized, I think I was reading The Lady Who Swallowed the Fly, and the woman was getting increasingly larger and larger and larger. And my 6-year-old mind was this is fascinating. Read this again. So there was something from a young age, but it wasn't really until middle school I came across online communities. And then I just kind of lurked for a long time until I was legal, and then I would post. But I think the thing that really cemented it for me was growing up in a society of fat phobia. I actually tried to pull away from this sexuality. I tried to date skinny folk in high school. I tried to push it away, pretend it wasn't part of me at all. And I realized I was almost asexual. Like I had so much shame. I couldn't be open about my kinks with people early on in my life. And it resulted in me being pretty detached from any form of sexuality. And so I think it was finally like when I was 19, I was like, okay, I'm not going to hide this from partners anymore. I'm just going to like be fully transparent and say like, this is what I'm into. And because of that, I've realized if people are really interested in you, they'll want to engage and please you. And if you're already searching for people who are into the things you're into, it becomes easier and easier to find that overlap, thankfully. And so I suppose within the wider queer community, the more open I am about my preferences and sexuality, the more I find people that share this interest. I will say that the funny thing about the queer side of the community for me is on dating apps, 990 likes are men, and then I get like 10 likes from women. So I'm still trying to find local women in this community. But for now, most of the women I interact with are online. So, but that's me. Like, I almost consider myself fat sexual because I am so drawn to fat bodies.
I think a big thing that it like informed like my sexuality and like experiences were, so like I grew up, I'm from Texas originally, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about the South. This is like one of the main areas in which I will claim my heritage very proudly. And that is one good thing about it is there are plenty of big boys there. And growing up and just seeing a lot of really fat men where obviously like there was plenty of fat phobia, like not going to hold you, but there was a different relationship with it as well. And there was a certain expectation of certain kinds of men being fat where it was like seen as very like masculine, very powerful, like kind of just like it was almost normal in a certain aspect. And what was like always particularly fascinating for me was the women that they were often married to, because these women would like, they talk about how like well they cooked, all these different things. And I thought that was so like interesting. I was like, well, like here's your husband, and I'm like, well, he looks good, but then here's the person, at his side who's like the main reason why this has happened. And so that has really been like what kind of has like, informed like my sexuality. I think in terms of like broader experiences, I knew I liked fat before I knew I was gay. And it was very funny because I was like, oh, well, I'm not gay. And I never thought of it as like a bad thing where it's like, oh, being gay is the issue. But I was like, well, when I look at gay people in the broader culture or porn or different things, they were always skinny. So I'm like, well, that's not what I like. So I'm evidently that's not what I am. But it wasn't until later that I found in the community. I was not so wise as you were, April, to wait until I was of legal age to go into these spaces, unfortunately. But yes, I was only lurking, thankfully, but
I was mostly lurking. It was okay.
Yes,
sorry.
No, you're good. That's been my experience, or the start of my experience.
I mean, both of you have said things that I absolutely relate to. Cam, you talked about being into fat before you even realized you were gay. Completely the same. And I was quite a late developer generally. So it wasn't until I was in my very late teens, early 20s that I even kind of discovered sexuality at all, really. So I was quite a late developer. And so there's always been this sort of catch up for me in terms of like meeting people and knowing what it is that I want and what drives me. I think for me, I mean, April, you sort of mentioned sort of the stigma around it. I think, part of it was I never really appreciated the journey that big people went through, right, to get to their size. Let's cut all that out and get to the end of it, which was fine, and there is definitely that sort of role, that connection with people. We've talked about admirers, chasers, if we're using that word as well, right? Who are just like they're just into the bigness, they're not necessarily worried about the bit in between. But it's been the journey to discover that part of it, that bit in between, understanding that people have gone through this process, have actually consciously made this decision, and actually maybe sometimes not consciously. I mean, there is nothing hotter to me than thinking about a guy who's just gotten fat. I've gotten fat and I'm enjoying it and this feels good and I feel stimulated and all the rest of it. But there's no, you don't, shame is not yours. If you feel shame about it, you don't need to, because that's another person's projection. You can just enjoy who you are and the life you want to live.
As for myself, I feel like I kind of sprung out both gay and as an admirer at a very young age. I didn't know what I'd do with a fat man if I got hold of one, but I wanted to find out as a very young person. But I kind of joke that in some ways I'm a throwback to my Middle European ancestors who viewed a chubby person as healthy, a healthy build, it used to be called. But the thing for me was the sensuality. And also, while I was always an admirer of fat people, fat men particularly, I think for me, there was also, by being part of the encouragement gainer world, a mutual respect, because I had been to certain chaser events where if you compliment someone on their looks, immediately they would tell you about, oh, you don't mean that. I have to lose weight, or I'm on a diet and it's not working. And it's like, so the thing that I'm complimenting you on is something that revolts you. And that doesn't quite give me a good dynamic. So the wonderful thing about joining up with the encouragement world was that I could say to someone that you look very sexy. That belly is amazing on you. And they'd say, you think so? Oh, you got to see it when I really start straining my belt. And it doesn't even have to be the physicality, just the ability to express it to somebody. It was funny when I went to the Encourage Cons in the 1990s, run by Ben Stone. His real name was John Alcott. I can use it now. The urge to be a sexual being was less about physicality and more about the fact that you could just express admiration and people would enjoy hearing it. And there would be events celebrating their largeness. And it just felt so normalized that it was an absolute delight. And I really, really was very lucky that I could be part of that. I mean, as I've gotten older, I've discovered other body types that I enjoy as well. But for me, the fellow who has a tummy and who is in clothes that don't quite fit anymore is still a very powerful image. It's something I've celebrated in the stories I wrote and the drawings I used to draw. And I'm just lucky that I say it, lucky, it seems to be a major phrase for me, that I fell into that world and met some very dear people who were able to appreciate my appreciation.
Well, and that's leading into the question that I was going to ask. Like the way that we view the world entrenched in this fetish culture and the wider queer community as it is. Like, I know that when I went out and was trying to like date the field and I was dating chubby men, I was sleeping with chubby men. But the minute that they found out that I was into gaining and encouraging, they all got really squeamish. They were all like, wait a minute. It's like, I'm not saying that I need you to gain weight. And that was never anything that I put forward. I'm just saying, like, I appreciate that you are big. If you were to be bigger, that's not a problem. If you were to be smaller, that is not a problem. But they get really tense when you bring up the gaining and encouraging thing. And I have to assume it's because of bad faith members of the community not respecting people's boundaries. What have you guys experienced in the wider queer community when you mention that you're into this?
It is genuinely hell. And like, April, like I'm going to pose a question to you in a second, because something that has like always fascinated me is the like distinction between like fat sexuality in the queer community and fat sexuality among like straight people. And I know you're not straight, April, but I just mean like within like men and women interacting with one another. And I think it's like because like Cube, you were talking about the interactions in a chubby chaser dynamic where you have chasers and chubs, but even you as a chaser going up to a chub and complimenting their belly, they're like, what the fuck? And it's like, well, I thought that was the point. I thought we were here because we liked fatness. And I think what is so interesting is that Like, I love the kink aspect of this. I think like having a kink, it builds community. It makes you feel like it validates yourself as a person. There's a lot of great stuff about like kink, but I think what really like trips me up is how, because a lot of queer people view appreciating fatness as like only this sexuality, only this kink thing, that there's like a hostility towards it. They feel like it's like this strange thing. But then when I look at like straight people, there's so many, they like anytime you see like a man, also women too, but like a lot of times like they get married, they settle down, they get fat as hell, and they don't blink twice about it. But if you're with a gay person and it's like, so what if you gain a little weight? Or like, how could you, like, it's like you suggested that like you, the most insane thing. And I'm like, I don't understand this. And so I'm curious, April, kind of like what your like experience with that is, because I feel like it is so like normalized or expected in between men and women in some ways. And I wish the gays had that. I wish we could just be like a little bit more normal about it. Like it wasn't this freaky thing.
Yeah, I get that because you have your typical man woman, and it's like the white picket fence dream. You have man and a woman, you have kids, and you're so busy with kids and raising kids, you just get fat. And then you loving happy family, you're in love, and you don't really know what goes on behind the sex doors. Though honestly, I think there's so much societal fat phobia out there, but I honestly think that people are into each other. Fat people are fucking all the time, whether that's kink world or not kink world. Fat people are fucking. And it's so funny to me that like in TV and media, we act like fat people aren't getting laid. Fat people are definitely getting laid every single day. And I bet you there's a lot of size appreciators out there that just may not be as vocal and open about it. The other thing too that I always find fascinating to talk about is like you can view this within a kink frame, and you can also view it within a preference frame. And I think it is a bit of a spectrum. Like, for example, I know people that are like into bigger people, but it kind of ends there. And then, like, for me, I think it extends a little beyond a preference because I love to like get my face in a belly, worship a belly. I love weight gain. I love feeding people food. So there's so many aspects of it that it is, I guess you could call it a kink or sexuality. The reality is too, I think about this all the time. People say fat fetish, and I'm like, there's no skinny fetish. Like, can people just have preferences for fat people without it having to be a fetish? Like, I think it's okay for people to say, I just like fat people and it's not a fetish. That's just my preference. I think it's also okay if you want to call it a fetish, only because there's so many like interrelating kinks that are related. But yeah, I also don't want to fetishize fat people without their consent. It's like if I'm in a relationship with someone, for example, recently, I won't go too deep into details, but I am not dating a Feabie. I am dating a bear right now. And so I've been very hyper conscious of not making my partner uncomfortable. So I do check in constantly with consent and be like, is it okay if I touch your belly? Does this feel weird to you? Are you okay? And I've been very, very, very lucky that I've had people in my life that are willing to explore this with me. All this to say that I'm pretty sure hetero people are also behind closed doors enjoying luscious fat rolls, and they're just not like on the kink sites about it.
Part of that is, as you point out, you're being very careful, and because you want to validate the person, but you want to be able to express your desire and your attraction to them. And it can be a very fraught situation. And as I pointed out with the Girth and Mirth events, I mean, I've said, though I'm not sure how popular it is, that actually for me, a somewhat slender guy with a pot belly who really appreciates you admiring him is far more a turn on to me than a massive fellow who cannot cope with any addressing of his body size and who immediately just will turn everything down and tell me that my interest or desire for him is wrong.
I ran into that a lot at the bathhouses. So while I was there, I would intentionally seek out, I would call it whale watching. I would intentionally seek out the biggest guys that I could possibly find. And I hate to say it this way, but that wasn't difficult because they usually got passed over. So, you know, if I walked past a room and there was a big old bear in there or just a regular big old chubby guy, I'd enter, and they would usually be totally fine with that, and we'd get. And unfortunately, this happened more often than it didn't. They would be like, "Why are you touching my belly? Why are you touching my fat? Why are you grabbing my fat ass or my fat thighs?" And I'm like, "Because I like it." And they would get all weird and uncomfortable.
You know, this comes to a point that I know I said a lot during the first season. I don't see what we do as gainers as a kink or a fetish. I think there are kinky and fetishistic elements, but I think if what we're talking about is the root desire to appreciate a larger body and therefore to similarly accrue a larger body, I don't think that's a fetish. I just think that is a natural expression of sex in a full spectrum of its own desires. And I think, you know, again, the conversation around language, if you feel comfortable addressing it as a fetish, fine. But I think, again, it's that question of like what these things entail. And actually, I would like to take this opportunity to remind people we did a review, I think it was in our third season, with Charles Bukowski. He co-authored a book called Feederism, which came out in 2015. To this day, it's one of the only books that takes an actual clinical approach to gaining and fetism through a sexual lens. And part of this, we queried in the book, he'd mentioned the designation of lipophilia because it's considered a paraphilia. And it's like, well, how does that distinction come in? And he basically said, oh, most things that are considered kink, fetish, or paraphilia are designated as such because the goal of this sex is not to produce children. So for a long time, even back in when homosexuality was like, oh, we can put you in the funny house for this, we can send you to prison, because it's designated as an inappropriate form of sex, a perversion, because you're not trying to have children. So therefore, it's a perversion of what sex is meant to be, which is to further the species. And so, like, yeah, further on down the line, when you're like, oh yeah, I just want to like fuck fatties and like have a good time with food and everything, they would still look at that and be like, Is the goal to have children? Nope. Guess this is.
God forbid that you enjoy sex.
God forbid a girl should have a hobby. My God.
This is the best hobby of all.
So there's something else that I want to pose to the group. You know, as non-gainers, do you guys find that the attention that you receive is positive, or does it end up triggering more like traumatic elements of your bodily experiences?
I think for me, because it's so new to me, in as much as I've always sort of, I guess, seen myself on the other side of it, I have just experienced joy with it. Because this sort of change around for me has happened quite recently and it's happened quite intentionally, I think I am undeterred by other people's opinions. You know, you reach a point in life where you're just too old to care and you have no time to care what other people think of you. I've had what I would call a lot of existential experiences that have kind of driven me to be more determined to enjoy my life, even if that means less of it, because of the things that I'm going to do to enjoy my life mean that I will probably end up not living until I'm 80, so whatever it is. I'm comfortable with that. I've made my peace with that. So for me, there isn't really an opinion or a perspective that I'm particularly fussed one way or the other. I've been very open with my own family about it, and a lot of that is because a lot of my previous shame has come from my family, right? A lot of the way that I was made to feel about my size has come from my family. So my way of preempting any comment is to just say, here it is. It's your shit to deal with and not mine. If you want to have an adult conversation, let's do so. If not, let's just move on. And so I guess that makes life just a little bit more easy. You know, you can be more succinct and you can be happier with it. I mean, going back to Cube's point earlier, and I think we've all sort of touched on it a little bit around, you know, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, first coming out in London, looking back, just how limited it was, right? Just these people were not open to things. They wanted everything to sort of fit in a neat little box, even if that box was like streams of piss or a fisting nightclub or whatever it is, right? These were acceptable forms of kink and diversity, but God forbid you should be fat. And God forbid you should enjoy eating, because if you do those things, then you are like way out there. I mean, no. And I think that we're now at a point where conversations about these things are just so much more open. So that would be sort of my broad answer to that question.
It's funny because, as I've said, in a way, I came out before the internet as both gay and an encourager. And I fell into a world, it was pure serendipity, where I was sheltered. I actually had a group that I was coming out to who has both, and it kind of made my interactions a lot easier. True, I mean, I had a sort of belated adolescence where I made my mistakes, but I had people who helped me pick up the pieces when I made my small little messes. And I mean, John Alcott was constantly pushing me on to be the writer, be the creator, to experience things. And in a way, it was sad because when he passed away in 2007, I kind of started drifting out of that world because I kind of missed my adopted dad. And I had my moments with both content creation also. When I first went online in in uh, in the early part of the century, and I put my full name on things, and then suddenly certain family members hit the ceiling, not of course because it was gainer encourager content, but because, oh my God, he's gay. And so it was always kind of interlocked on that score. But for me, it's always been a part of who I am, even as I've acknowledged that there are other parts of my sexuality and other people I'm attracted to. I mean, in truth, it's really the personality that drives me more than even the body type. I mean, I have come to events with very slender men who everyone's going like, why are you with him? Or you're going to plump him out, aren't you? And I'm going like, no, I like him as he is. Because for me, true, I could fantasize about it, but for me, it was always the mutual attraction and the sense that a person was happy with himself. And if he could be happy with himself as a fat guy or as a man who was putting on weight, I would be thrilled because he is now checking all boxes. But it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other for me on that score, because I ended up being rather secure in both because I'd get in trouble for one or the other.
I think for me, it's so weird. So I mentioned that I went into the community when I should not have been and was lurking. And it was very funny because I heard about Grommr from, I probably would have been Tumblr. And I was like, well, let me check this place out. This place sounds like Mecca, it sounds like heaven. Like, I need to go here. And when I went on there, it was honestly like, it made me so depressed for a couple months, because what I saw was a lot of like fat people talking about how they hated like encouragers, feeders, like a lot of the comments about like what I came to understand is that like shitty behavior from encouragers. And I was like, well, that's not me. Like I'm not that person. So like, but like, does that mean they hate me as well? And so I think I became very sensitive to how I was coming across to fat people and to gainers, and just like the ways in which that I like spoke with them, because I didn't want to embody a lot of other experiences they have had. And what was difficult on the flip side of that was, and why like being an enabler is how I came to identify, it's because it was always a big turnoff when people would come to me and they would try to like flirt with me or do anything like that, and they would say like, what are you going to do to me? And it's like, well, this isn't about what I want to do to you. This is about like what you enjoy, and I also enjoy that, and like how can like what can we do together like through that. And it is difficult because it's not that I think some of the folks are like racist insofar as like malicious like conscious in what they're doing, but I do recognize that like, yes, a lot of people have like the fantasy of a very dominant or consistent feeder or encourager, things like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that also plays into a very like common fantasy people have about Black men in general and how they come across sexually. And that's something that I've always been very sensitive to, because I'm the complete opposite. And I know that is like people have this like desire. It's like, this is what I want from you. And I'm like, not what you're getting, hun. And just trying to like navigate that has been very difficult.
I just wanted to mention to Cameron that I've written some stories where there is a more dominant, in fact, and against the feedie's will aspect. And yes, it can be a turn on, but I've always been kind of happier with the more mutual two people making progress on their own situation. But yeah, there is that out there, but it has to be like a lot of other porn, very understood. This is a fantasy. You don't do that to people unless they are actually telling you that's what they want.
Oh, absolutely, Cube. I think the rub for me is more so because what that suggests to me is a perspective that why folks this is like their default assumption, right? And I think obviously like on some level like we can all probably understand like we like the idea of someone kind of like loss of like control that comes with fatness, like whether it's like the loss of control and enjoyment and like the pleasure of the food, all of that. And I completely get that. I love that as well. And because of that, I think people have that sort of like, oh, well, you must want to like push this. You want when like force it's like, well, not exactly. Like I get where it comes from, but and obviously like consent is like always the most important thing. But I think people's perspective on that is what kind of informs the way they approach things.
Mm-hmm. I could not agree with all of you more on everything you said, Cameron and Cube. I feel like consent is the utmost importance to all of us. But then on top of that, there's like the different approaches to gaining fetism enabling. And I've noticed a line in my head of reality and then things I more tend to play out in fantasies only. And I think that is another common thing in the community is like in day to day, I love people just like enjoying food. And I don't always like being dommy. Like it's funny because as a feeder, you can be dommy or subby. Like you could be dommy, like a consensually planned skit or set where you're like, hey, eat this food. Or you could switch the roles and the feedie is the dom and he's like the gluttonous king and I'm the servant and I have to feed the large king the food, which I think feedism, it can be so beautiful in the sense you can switch up the power dynamics, or you can just sit there and enjoy food and there can be like no power dynamic other than you and just the beautiful food, which is, it's such a like diverse sexuality, which is why I find it so beautiful.
I've just been making some notes as people have been saying things, and actually, Dom, something you did say that I'd like to bring up, because you mentioned about the acceptable forms of kink diversity that exist, and I'd like to encourage people to go and check out our interview with Barney the Mucklestoder on the Clown Kink episode, because he shares a lot of experiences about, for him, the journey of, well, I'm into clowns, but there aren't things out there for clowns, so what do? I have to find ways in which clowns can enmesh with other kink things. And so he found a way to get latex rubber outfits commissioned in these bright bubblegum delicious colors. And that's latex, baby. That's him at the party. Or getting like a full like clown outfit made of leather. Like so fascinating to see that process. And there is genuinely so much like intrigue and joy through like almost a drag lens of how do you take these two seemingly, incongruent concepts and find a way to just marry them together. So I think there is a lot of opportunity for people to do that. And I will certainly say that of you, Dom, for the conversations we've had, you certainly are seemingly that person who finds opportunities to enmesh what you're looking for, what the other person's looking for. You're very good at finding that through line with other people. And I wonder if maybe this is something that, broadly speaking, gainers and encourager types could, like, do a little better with one another. Kind of like Cam was saying, and like you were saying, Cube, there's that expectation. You message someone and go, oh, I see what you look like. Therefore, in my head, I decided what personality you must have, what kind of tropes you're going to fulfill in this kind of dalliance. April, I have a gendered expectation of you as a woman. What do you mean you're not going to perform? Insert arbitrary idea of concept here. Maybe more of us could find opportunities to actually ask and get to know the individual and say, what are you here for? And maybe from there we could figure out if this is going to be a match, and then we could take a step forward.
And I appreciate that. And I think both Cam and Cube have said things that I mostly understand from the point of view of being a feeder, right? So throughout my life, I've been bigger and kind of just looked like a middle-aged man. And so I've always had like the daddy vibes and all of those sorts of things. And then obviously my name is Dom. And so that has just confused everybody. And it's a weird thing to having to be trying to live up to something that you haven't actually said is yours, right? I've never gone out of my way to say, I am a big dom daddy and I'm going to do all these things to you, right? And I think one of the things about feeding in particular, when it comes to consent, is it's an extremely intimate thing that you are doing. And, there are consequences if it goes wrong, right? And as a feeder, I have on a couple of occasions gone a little too far, not because I was being necessarily aggressive, but because the communication hadn't been quite right between us, and so there's been mess. And that's part of the experience, in the same way that if you're fucking someone, you're going to have that experience as well, right? There's going to potentially be stuff going on. But I think I feel better about what I'm doing when I truly believe that somebody understands it. So for me, one-off feedings are not really the way that I tend to go usually, because there's so much that goes into developing that relationship. Yes, it's obviously about the growth over a period of time, but actually I would like to get to a point where where if I'm making content, or even if I'm just feeding someone, where I could really get that high intensity, like force feeding. But you can't do that after 1 meet, 2 meet, 3 meets, because I was with my gainer bud this weekend and I was feeding him. Even now, we've been hanging out for quite a long time and spending a lot of time doing this together. There's still an uncertainty, not in a negative way, but just I'm feeling your belly and I'm noticing that it's at the same stage it was when the last time when I felt we needed to stop. What do you think? So you have to have like these little cues and these little sort of things that you kind of get off each other. And then I think Cam sort of touched earlier a little bit on like intensity and stuff. Like, I don't want people to be hurt. I really don't want people to be put off. If you're feeding someone, and I've heard, and I have a feeling, James, you and I might have had a conversation about this, where, somebody's had a bad feeding experience. Maybe they were sick afterwards or something like that. And that's it for them. And that would be really sad. So I try to keep it gentle. I can be dominant. And I would say that that's probably my vibe, but it's not in any way like a physical, aggressive thing. It's more like, hey, come on, we agreed that you were going to get so many calories in today. You can have a break, but we got to come back, right? Firm but fair. And there's a hotness to that is also kind of rooted in outcomes.
So I want to actually put something you had mentioned briefly earlier, Dom. You had mentioned how back maybe a time ago, when it came to these kinds of interactions, it was more the sense of skipping to the end, right? Where maybe you were prioritizing guys who were already big and feeding those. And this is a conversation, Tim and I have had this amongst ourselves, and I'm sure many other gainers do as well. There seems to be sometimes a conversation on the encourager side of things, shall we say, where there is validity in the act about prioritizing people who are already big versus doing that experience with people who are on the smaller side looking to become big. And I'd like to put this to the others here first, especially April, to yourself, because you've got different engagements with different people, especially at the moment. Like, how much of that is a conversation you have either with yourself or with other people who are on that side of the engagement?
This is a good question. So I like what Dom has said about authenticity and communication, because I think that's huge. I think 10 years ago when I met my first partner, who I'm currently with now, he was not what I call a born feedie. He's a feedie by proxy. And what I mean by that is feedism is not his main kink, but he can be subby and he gets off on pleasing people. So to a degree, he will like to engage in feedism, but because it's not his main kink, we check in very often. It's not like an everyday thing. We make it work through a lot of discussion and transparency and are like, are you enjoying this? But theoretically, if I had someone who would extremely get off on feedism, then maybe I would engage more aggressively if they wanted it. I feel like this is all about communication and transparency. And I think what a lot of people have said here, I resonate with as well, which is I want to see the other person having a good time. So I want to be doing something that my partner is happy to be doing, that I can see they're into it as well. I've had a really beautiful experience dating my other boyfriend. I'm polyamorous. And he's not a fetus, but he swiped me first. And one of my filters to be a little more efficient and transparent in life is on my polyamorous dating profile. I lay it all out. I'm like, I'm into big bellies. I'm a fetus. I like to feed people food. I like to worship fat bodies. Like, let me know if you're into that. And that way, the people who are already swiping me first are already intrigued in some way. And then it's a bit of a filter. So more people coming to me are more prone to be into it. And then I kind of explain more in person, like, this is what I'm into. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. And what I found is that some people just like getting their bodies worshipped as well, even if they aren't necessarily feeties. My boyfriend was like, oh yeah, that was actually really hot to see you so turned on and enjoying my body, because I've never had anyone appreciate my body like this before. I've never had anyone tell me my body is beautiful. I've never felt so appreciated. So I think, there could be room to share this sexuality with maybe people who aren't into it in quite the same way, as long as you can find that middle space that is enjoyable to both of you. And it goes the other way too. As a feedie, I realize I can push food on people, and I'd rather be transparent about that. And I've said to my partners, like, if I'm ever pushing food on you, don't feel pressured to say yes and engage with this all the time. Like, I often will be like, hey, do you want some foods? Hey, do you want some snacks? And I don't want people to feel like coerced into saying yes all the time. You can say no and be like, I'm not into it. And that's totally fine. Like, just know I will offer frequently. And if it gets annoying, tell me to stop. But yeah, I've noticed the more authentic and transparent I've been in my life, the more happy I am, the better relationships I have. And I think it helps break the stigma. Like, I'm reading the book, The Ethical Slut, right now, and it talks about, like, if you have the privilege to be open about polyamory and you're not going to get fired and you're not going to lose all your friends, be open, because it helps break the stigma. So I've applied this to other areas of my life. And if people say, what are you into? I say, I'm into big dudes and big ladies. And I don't have to go into every corner of the fetish, but that's enough to normalize, be like, it's okay to like fat people. End of story.
Where was that term when I needed it? Like, nobody told me I could be an ethical
slut.
No one told me that I could be an ethical slut. Everyone just said you're a slut. They never brought up my...
Tim, guess you put
Yes.
it on the reading list. Ethical
Yeah,
slut.
I guess I'm gonna have to figure out how to be an ethical slut now. I've been wandering around in the dark until now.
There you go.
Could you reiterate your question again? Like, I want to make sure I speak to it better.
That's okay. So essentially the question is something that a lot of gainers will have gripes about, shall we say. It seems sometimes there are plenty of encouragers who only want to feed existing fat people, and that a lot of the smaller people who want to be fed or have these, engagements, whether it's long-term or short-term, feel that they don't get the same opportunities because they aren't already exhibiting fatness. And the question to you is, when it comes to that dialogue, do you often have this with yourself or with others who are on your side of the conversation? And if so, where does that conversation take you?
I definitely had that conversation a lot with myself, with friends who have like similar feelings about the matter. I think what is difficult is, first and foremost, like, it sucks like that if you're not fitting the mold for someone, that you're not getting the engagement or attention you want. But like, I want to like offer maybe it's a little blunt, but I also think it's important, like an important understanding for like folks who feel like that is the position they find themselves in, which is like, unfortunately, like, there are people in the community who their sexuality is big, is like fat, is that. And if they're not getting the attention they want, like, unfortunately, like, this is where we're at. And I think the difficulty though there is, and the conversation I've had with people is, what is the pleasure that you're deriving from it? What you enjoy about this? And I do think that their entire attention is on people who haven't gotten to that size yet, who are small, and they enjoy like being able to like facilitate and get them to that bigger point. And there are other people who they like when people are already at like a certain size, because I think, and something that we haven't like talked about yet, is where does the desire and the motivation come from? Is it about compulsion or is it about intention? And I think for some people, like, this is very much like a compulsion that they have. It's something that they're doing already and getting to enjoy that. That's more of the camp where I find myself in, where it's like someone is already doing this, and I get to be part of that, and like we get to have, you know, a nice experience together through that. Other people, it's like it's not happening, or it's not happening in the way they want to, and they want to be able to say like, okay, well, how can I fit into this and get you to that point? And I think that's really the kicker. I hope I answered the question.
No, I certainly think so. I mean, ultimately, it's something that, on the gainer side of things, you... And this is not a projection to like any of you all in this, but sometimes, and especially when you're new, and you can see very clearly like certain people get to have, you don't get to have, you can end up internalizing that and going, well, if they're not going to feed me, how am I supposed to get fatter unless I'm already fat? But then, at least for me, when I was experiencing that as a baby gainer, was just the resolve to say, well, I can't look to other people to enact the full scope of my sexual idea. I have to go and pursue it for myself. You know, which I've often translated to, like, imagine any other form of sex, just penetrative sex. I approach you and say, hi, hello, I find you hot, I want to do the penetration with you. You don't have to say yes just because I want that. That would be crazy, to be like, no, you should. You should give that to me because I want that. Like, no, baby, no one owes you the thing. True connection is both of y'all are saying yes enthusiastically and consentingly, and therefore you get to come together and have the good time. And guess what, baby? If you're on the grinders and the people don't want it, but you horny, you better load up whatever porn site you can do so without government ID, and you better take care of business. You better go and get that done. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting question to put out there because obviously as gainers, we know what we talk about, but I feel like this is a good opportunity to like give other people a chance to speak on what you'll think through when it comes to that potential thing, you know?
I think I see what you mean. I think the focus that I've had in conversations with folks is that like frustration of them not getting where we are coming from. People don't have like a crystal ball, right? Like, and I know Dom was talking about being kind of like outcome focused. And in some ways, I think that is, it can be limiting, but it's also just what I enjoy. And unfortunately, we don't have like a crystal ball to divine the future. And there is just no shortage of people out there who will like promise you the moon, who will say like, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna eat everything that you want, just on and on and so forth. And it's like, okay, you're telling me that, and I get that you're excited. I get this is new to you, that this is like a really exciting experience you want to explore. But what you are communicating, just because you're saying it, doesn't mean that that is what's going to happen. And unfortunately, this is how we engage in this. As Dom was also talking about, it takes time. It is an investment, and like that sounds very calculating about like people to say like it's an investment, but it's like it could be emotional, financial, like physically. It's so many things that go into it, and I'm not going to invest my like time, energy, feelings, money potentially if I don't feel like there is a future with it. And I think that is just the unfortunate part that folks don't realize. But then again, also just like, well, yeah, like, I mean, like my username, bigger is best. I have people who are way less than me who will hit me up and then are confused when I'm not interested. It's like, well, honey, like, what do you think the name meant? You know, like it's things of that nature where it's kind of a frustration. Like, and we get it. Like we are sensitive. Like we all understand it. Like it sucks. We also have our own experiences of not, you know, being shut out the door before we could even get in, right? And that sucks. But I think it is just wishing there was a recognition of like why it might happen. And there doesn't necessarily seem to be one from folks sometimes.
I've always felt so much more than just, okay, the guy is getting fat. If I could reminisce just slightly, there was an Encourage Con I went to years ago where I guess I made a fool of myself because at their show and tell, I pulled out an MFK Fisher story called I Was Really Very Hungry, where she is on a walking tour in France and ends up in a restaurant where the waitress realizes this is a person who appreciates food. And she basically is feeding her everything that the admirable chef can present. And I was reading this and going like the sensuality, the fact that there are people appreciating other people involving food, involving the eating, involving the pleasures. And everyone in the room, as I'm reading this, is looking, so when does she get fat? And it was like, okay, so I still find that there's so many other parts of it as well as the body growth, the sensuality, the mutual pleasures. And I just hope that that can be part of it.
Yeah, I love everything everyone's saying. And yeah, I think this sexuality is so multifaceted, and some people lean in more one direction, but we also share so much as part of so many like interconnected sexualities. And it also breaks that stereotype that we see on like horrible channels like the TLC, that feedism is like a cis man preying on BBWs with no agency. But real feedism relationships are queer, and they're inherently against societal status quos, and they come in all sexualities, genders, shapes, sizes, colors, and span all across the globe. And I think that's what the world needs to know, is it's not just like the predator men on TV. Like, sure, there's 1% of fetus people in this kink might suck, like any kink, but I feel like most people are practicing in good faith and consent as much as there is issues.
Really, it's just ask questions, get to know every person that you talk with beyond just like the label, and get to know them. But like with that, just do that self-interrogation about like why you enjoy this and what you enjoy about it. And I think you'll have a lot more fun. I think a lot of times people don't think too hard about it. And I think that's really where a lot of assumptions end up coming in to make experience with people less fun.
Well, y'all, that's bringing us near to the end of today's episode. So listen, let's ask a last question and keep it cute. What do you want listeners to take away from today's conversation?
You know, shame is not something that belongs to you. It's something that other people put on you, and you don't need to have it. It means nothing. It is of no use to anybody. You can enjoy your life. If you are a respectful person, you pay your taxes, you treat people the right way, it's none of anybody else's business what you choose to do with your life. You should be entitled to enjoy your experiences. So I just hope people can find their person, whatever that means to them in this scene.
I would echo something similar. I think intention is so key. I think people are very thoughtless, and that sounds like shady. It's meant to be a little shady. Please be intentional about what you enjoy and the dynamics that you want, the experiences you want to have, and communicate that clearly, and really just get to know the person in the ways in which they want to share in their journey, and just listen.
I just agree with everything. Authenticity, transparency. And I didn't choose the sexuality, but now I've done so much work to release the shame and guilt that it is now part of me, and I'm now proud of it. So I've moved from a place of shame to this is who I am as a person. And I really value spending my time with other people who've done that work too, who have let go of the shame. That feels really good. And I hope a lot more people can get to that place.
Cameron and April have said it all beautifully. I really have very little to add other than just being open to the various experiences, both in and outside of what you expect.
Well, I still think that is a wonderful end to this week's episode, and I want to thank every single person for joining us today. Now, where can our listeners find you online?
Bigger is best at all platforms.
I'm still on Grommr. That's pretty much the main place.
So Insta is probably my main communication, coachgain.s, because somebody had taken Coach Gains. Coach Gains on Grommr, Coach Gains on JustForFans, and I'm on X. I'm sure if you search Coach Gains, you'll find me, and BlueSky as well.
I'm on Feabie and Tumblr as canadianfatsexual. I made a placeholder on Grommr to find like friends in my city, but I don't check it that often. And then I'm on Instagram at kinkyforfats, which is mostly butt pics because I'm an ethical slut.
Marvelous. Well, y'all, that brings us to the end of another fantastic week here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like, subscribe, rate us 5 stars, leave us a good review. Now, if you liked this episode, the podcast, our guests, or just us in general, please share it with your friends, encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram at ThiccyMouse and Grommr at Orpheus. You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or visit our website at podpage.com/Thicc Radio. If you want to become a financial supporter of the show, you can donate through our PayPal account, and you can always email us at thiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Spotify podcast.
Artwork, media design, editing, and production by James Heinzen.
With original theme music by CYMK.